Please welcome anthropologist and neuroscientist Helen Fisher.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted that you're here. And I hope you get some chairs back there. This is the second edition of Anatomy of Love. I never was going to write a second edition, but the publisher called me and said to me that this was a classic. It was something I didn't know, and that all I had to do really is write a new introduction and a new final chapter. And I said, oh, no problem, no problem. It was written 25 years ago. Then I read the book and sat down and cried. Everything was right in the book, but it was out of date because I had done so much since then. So what I'm going to do today is talk about some of the newest parts of the book that are additions. It took me almost 3 years to rewrite the book, and it's largely rewritten. And so I'm going to begin by talking about much that was added to it. I studied the brain. I studied the brain in love. I and my colleagues, Lucy Brown and Art Aaron and Bianca Acevedo and others, have now put over 100 men and women into a brain scanner, studying the brain circuitry of romantic love and attachment. The first 17 were people who were just fallen happily in love. The second group were people who had just been rejected in love, just been dumped. And the third group were people who were in love long-term. You can remain in love long-term. We weren't positive that that was the case. People kept on walking into our lab, people in their 50s and 60s, telling us they were still in love with their partners, not just loving them, but in love with them. So we put them in the machine, and indeed, we found that they had many of the same basic characteristics in the brain as people who had just fallen happily in love. So what I'm really going to do now is talk about some of the newest parts of the book, as I mentioned. Particularly, I want to address 5 separate issues. The first is something that people keep on asking me about, so I want to make myself clear on that, and that is technology changing love? The second is monogamy natural? Another question that's often asked to me. Third, I want to talk about why I'm a real optimist about the future of love, which I am, for what I regard as sound reasons. And I want to talk about what makes a happy marriage. Psychologists will always tell you a lot of things about what makes a happy marriage. I'm sure they're all true, but what I want to do is talk about what the brain says about a long-term happy marriage. And last, I want to talk about why you fall in love with one person rather than another. People will say we have chemistry. I wanted to know what that meant. So I think that we've evolved. Here's our brain scanning machine. It's up at Albert Einstein. It's one of several that we've used. And I think I've long believed that we've evolved 3 distinctly different brain systems for mating and reproduction. Sex drive, craving for sexual gratification. Romantic love, craving for a particular human being. And attachment, that brain system linked with calm and a deep sense of commitment to another person. I think the sex drive evolved to get you out there looking for a whole range of partners. You can have sex with somebody you're not in love with. You can feel the sex drive when you're driving along in your car or on your subway or reading a book or watching a movie. It's not necessarily focused on just one person. Romantic love is focused on one person. That person suddenly becomes very special. Their car is different from every other car in the parking lot. What they watch on Google, the movies they like, the books they like, every single thing about them becomes special. As George Bernard Shaw once said, he said, love consists of overestimating the differences between one woman and another. And indeed, that's exactly what we do. And last, the brain region for attachment enables you to tolerate this person. So the sex drive gets you out looking for a range of partners. Romantic love enables you to focus your mating energy on just one at a time. And the third brain region of attachment enables you to stick with this person, tolerate them at least long enough to raise a single child together as a team. And I think that these 3 brain systems operate in many complicated ways. When you first fall in love with somebody, our group has proven that dopamine activity becomes very active in the brain. And as it turns out, as the dopamine goes up, it triggers testosterone, and suddenly you feel the sex drive for the person too. You know, last week, 3 weeks ago, was just a nice person at work or at school or in the gym or in a social circle. Now every single thing about this person becomes sexually attractive. Just the way they move their hair, the way they get on the bus, the way they smile, everything becomes sexually attractive. And it's because the dopamine system is driving up the testosterone system and the sex drive. That's the whole point of romantic love, to start the mating process. But can the reverse be true? Can you have sex with somebody and then fall in love with them? Well, not always. Most adults have had sex with somebody, hoping even to fall in love with them, and it didn't happen. But it can happen. And the reason it can happen is as you are beginning to make love with somebody, any stimulation of the genitals drives up the dopamine system in the brain and can push you over the threshold into falling in love. And indeed, it can also trigger attachment. With orgasm, you're driving up the oxytocin and vasopressin system that are associated with feelings of attachment. So the bottom line is, sex is not casual. Unless you're so drunk that you can't remember it, it's not casual. It triggers various brain systems, and it can certainly trigger feelings of romantic love and attachment. As a matter of fact, I am chief scientific advisor to Match, and we do an annual study called Singles in America. We do not poll the Match population. We poll the American population. It's a representative sample based on the US Census. And every year I ask a question. I now have data on over 30,000 people. And every year I ask the question, have you ever had a one-night stand that turned into a long-term partnership? And every single year, between 25 and 35% of people say yes. So bottom line, it's not casual. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of the ways that people try to trigger romantic love, you know? I mean, either you could talk to the guy or girl for 3 years about their plans, or you can try and get them into bed tonight and trigger these brain circuitries for romantic love. So these operate in many ways in tandem, but not always. You can lie in bed at night and feel deep attachment to one person, and then swing into feelings of wild romantic love for somebody else, and then swing into feelings of the sex drive, even for somebody that you don't even know. So bottom line is, these three brain systems evolved long ago, and I think that they can evolve in tandem, driving us to fall in love and form a pair bond and rear our children as a team, or they can operate separately, leading to adultery and divorce and remarriage. We've got a very complicated reproductive cycle, and we've left ourselves with all kinds of opportunities for great love and great sorrow. So the first thing I want to address is technology changing love? I'm going to say that it is not, and it's never going to. These three brain systems lie way below the cortex. They lie way below, there's the cortex, way below the limbic system in the middle of the brain that orchestrates a lot of your emotions. They lie in some of the most primitive regions of the brain. In fact, it's called the midbrain and down into the brain stem. The arrow is pointing to the basic brain regions. It's called the ventral tegmental area, VTA. It actually makes dopamine, which is a natural stimulant that gives you that feeling of elation and focus and motivation. In this case, the motivation to win life's greatest prize, which is a mating partner. Right near it, the yellow dot is the hypothalamus. It's actually not in that same brain stem, but it lies right next to it, and it orchestrates the sex drive. And last but not least, the brain region for attachment lies just above it, but still way below your thinking processes and your emotional systems. So the bottom line is these brain regions are linked with wanting, with craving, with energy, with focus, and with motivation. As I said, the motivation to win life's greatest prize, which is a mating partner. They evolved over 4 million years ago. We call them survival mechanisms. They lie right next to thirst and hunger. You know, our dating sites are not going to change our thirst and hunger patterns, and they are not going to change our brain regions for intense romantic love. I maintain in my book, Anatomy of Love, that these evolved over 4.4 million years ago when our ancestors began to come down out of the trees. They come from animal antecedents. In my book, Anatomy of Love, I actually really start about 21 million years ago and bring mankind up into where we are today. But the bottom line is these brain systems evolved a long time ago, and they're not going to change whether you swipe left or right on Tinder. They are basic survival mechanisms that evolved millions of years ago, and if we survive as a species, they will be with us a million years from now. We're built to love. Technology is changing courtship, though. We are emailing, we're texting, we're using emojis, we're sexting. We're advertising when we do all of our sexting. We're seeing new rules and taboos of courtship. One new rule that I'm very pleased with is 70% of singles today, I've got data on 30,000 people, as I mentioned, 70% of singles today really regard it as rude if you do a lot of texting on a date. And I think we're going to see more and more taboos that become commonplace as this new technology changes. We're seeing an expanding of the dating pool. You can meet people from all over the country and the world. We're being able to be introduced now to very like-minded people rather than just the girl next door or the boy in the next farm nearby. Older people can now get on dating sites instead of living at home and play the role of grandparenting. They're now living alone and dating, etc. But even these dating sites are really actually not dating sites. What they are is introducing sites. The only real algorithm is your own brain. After you meet somebody, you go meet them on a park bench, at a bar, at school, in a coffee house. The ancient human brain clicks into action, and you court the way we always have. You smile the way we always have. You laugh the way we always have. You listen the way we always have. You parade the way we always have. Technology simply can't change these human patterns of behavior. As a matter of fact, we think that this is the great age of modern technology that is changing love. But what about the late 1940s or the early 50s when the automobile became very popular and they suddenly had a rolling bedroom? That's much more dramatic than swanking left or right on Tinder. And how about the birth control pill in the early 1970s? I mean, unchained from thousands of years of worry about pregnancy and disease. These days a woman can figure out how not to get all those problems and express their sexuality. So throughout history, another time is the beginning of agriculture. I won't go into it. I do it in the book, Anatomy of Love. But the bottom line is with the beginning of agriculture and the invention of the plow, people were stuck together. Suddenly we have the concept of virginity at marriage, honor thy husband till death do us part. That's much more powerful than swiping left or right on Tinder. So the bottom line is technology is not going to change love. It's going to change courtship, but it's not going to change love. We pine for love, we live for love, we kill for love, and we die for love. It's one of the most powerful brain systems the human animal has ever developed. We have myths and legends about it. We haven't changed our operas, our plays, our poems, our novels, our sitcoms, our ballets, our holidays. This brain system is going to be with us as long as we survive on this planet as a species. Another thing that is not going to change is the fact that we make pair bonds. So my second thing I want to discuss is monogamy natural? First of all, mono means one to scientists, probably not to the public. Mono means one, and gamy means spouse. one spouse. It doesn't mean whether you're adulterous or not. It means one spouse. And came home to me many times in my life, but this was a time I was traveling in the highlands of New Guinea, and it was 3 years ago. And some of them still look like this. They're dressed up. This is his concept of the tuxedo. And generally, they're wearing just shorts and a shirt. But anyway, I certainly saw plenty of people like that. And I ran into one of them, and he happened to have 3 wives. So I asked him, how many wives would you like to have? And there was this long pause. And I thought to myself, is he going to say 5? Is he going to say 10? Is he going to say 25 wives? And he leaned forward to me and he whispered, none. In fact, we are a pair bonding animal. 86% of world cultures permit a man to have several wives, but in the vast majority of those cultures, only about 5 or 10% of men actually do have several wives. Women fight. Sometimes they will poison each other's children. You got to have a lot of cows, or a lot of goats, or a lot of money, or a lot of land, or a lot of influence to talk a group of women into sharing you. So basically, we are a pair bonding animal. 97% of mammals do not pair up to rear their young. Human beings do. And that was really the beginning of the story of this book. This is not to suggest that we're sexually faithful to our partners. I've looked at adultery in 42 cultures. You find it in every one, even where you can get your head chopped up for it. We know some of the genetics that are involved. We know some of the cultural forces that are involved. But certainly, we are an animal that also cheats. In fact, people always want to know why we cheat. I've written a lot of articles about it. That's not really the news. The news is that we bother to pair up at all, and we do it with remarkable regularity. As Samuel Johnson once said of remarriage, he called it the triumph of hope over experience. And indeed, we do it over and over again. We also divorce. I've looked in 80 societies. There's world patterns to divorce, I think, that come out of our evolutionary past. I wonder how many, because you're from Google, you've probably seen that the bottoms as opposed to how many people actually saw the bottom as opposed to as well as the top? Yeah, it's never that many. Anyway, there's nothing new about divorce. In hunting and gathering societies, people tended to divorce 2 or 3 times. What's really unusual today is that we not only divorce, but we don't have local community to support people after the divorce. But divorce is not new, and it's part of what I would call our human reproductive strategy. As a matter of fact, I think that we've evolved what I call a dual human reproductive strategy, a tremendous drive to fall in love and pair up and have children as a team, restlessness in long relationships, not everybody, a tendency to be adulterous, and a tendency to divorce and remarry. We also got a big brain in which we make decisions about our lives. We are not puppets on a string of DNA. We make decisions, but when you take a look around the world, this seems to be the basic pattern of the human animal. And I think it says something about today. I think in our modern world, most of us have to contend with both of those drives, a tremendous drive for commitment and a tremendous drive for autonomy, which we all cope with in our own way. So why would I be so optimistic about the future if, in fact, we have these patterns of human love? I'm optimistic because of something that I call slow love. As I mentioned, with Match.com, I do this annual study called Singles in America. We got now data on over 30,000 people. And it's a representative sample of Americans. We do not poll the match population. And every year I ask a lot of questions, and one of them is about one-night stands and friends with benefits and living together. And every year I end up finding that over 50% of people have had a one-night stand, not necessarily in the last year, but over the course of their lives. Over 50% have had friends with benefits, and over 50% of people have lived with somebody long-term. And I thought to myself, that's a lot of people doing this in a culture where it's really a bit frowned upon. they're not all crazy. There's got to be something going on here. Most people think that this is pure recklessness of the young, but the old are just as reckless, I want to say. I finally stumbled on a statistic, which was the 67% of people in America today who are living in a long-term partnership before marrying are terrified of the social and the legal and the emotional and the economic consequences of divorce. So it suddenly occurred to me, maybe this is not recklessness, maybe it's caution. Maybe these people want to we live in an age where we're not scared of pregnancy, really. We can handle that. We're not scared of disease, as I mentioned. You don't have to walk the walk of shame. And I think that an awful lot of people are taking their time to find the right person. Where we used to marry at age 19 or 20, the average in America now is age 27 for women and 29 for men. Then they're remarrying again in their middle 30s, et cetera. And I think that what we're moving into is an age of what I call a long pre-commitment stage before marriage. We want to know every single thing about this person before we tie the knot, before we marry. And I call it slow love. And so, in fact, where marriage used to be the beginning of a relationship, now it's the finale. But the brain triumphs anyway. About 86% of Americans will marry by middle age. In parts of Europe, they don't bother to marry, but they certainly settle down into long-term partnerships. And it began to occur to me that if we have this long pre-commitment stage before we marry, perhaps you get rid of bad relationships during that period of time. And by the time you're walking down the aisle and about to marry somebody, you know who this person is. You know you want this person, and you know you can keep this relationship long term. So I thought to myself, okay, well, we got this slow love and this long pre-commitment stage in relationships. Maybe we're going to see more happy marriages. So I did a study of 1,100 married people, and I asked them a lot of questions. But one of the questions was, would you remarry the person that you're currently married to? And in fact, 81% said yes. So that's why I'm optimistic about the future. But what makes a happy marriage? We had all these people coming into our lab who said that they were in a long-term happy marriage. We had older people coming into the lab. We did a study of them, first author being Bianca Acevedo, and we studied long-term marriages also in China, first author being Mona Zhu. And in fact, those people who showed a lot of activity in brain regions linked with romantic love in a long-term marriage or long-term relationship, and also scored high on a marriage satisfaction questionnaire. And we found 3 brain regions that were associated with long-term happiness. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this, psychologists have a host of different ways of telling you what makes a happy partnership. This is what the brain says. I'm just trying to add what the brain says. And in fact, in these people in long-term happy marriages in 2 very different parts of the world, we found activity in a brain region linked with empathy, in a brain region linked with controlling your own stress and your own emotions, and with a brain region linked with what I call, and others call, positive illusions, the ability to overlook what you don't like about this person and focus on what you do. And those are the 3 brain regions linked with long-term happiness. I would also say that if you really want long-term happiness, keep up your sex life with the person. As we know, that can trigger romantic love and feelings of attachment. Stay in touch with the person. Any kind of touch drives up the oxytocin system and can give you feelings of attachment. And do novel things together. Novelty definitely drives up the dopamine system and can help you either fall back in love or stay in love. But most important, you got to marry the right person. You got to pick the right person from the very beginning. So why him? Why her? Why do we fall in love with one person rather than another? this is what Match.com came to me and asked me in 2005 before they hired me. And I said, I don't know. Nobody knows. We got some ideas of why you fall in love with one person rather than another, but we don't really know. We definitely know that timing plays a role. Proximity plays a role. At my age, I would say lighting plays a role. You tend to fall in love with somebody from your same ethnic and socioeconomic background, same level of intelligence, good looks, and education. Similar religious values and social values. Your reproductive and your economic goals are very important. And your childhood experiences always play a role. But I thought to myself, you can walk into a room and everybody's from your background. Everybody's from your level of education and intelligence and degree of good looks. And you don't fall in love with all of them. So could it be that biology also plays a role? And I began to think, well, maybe if I looked into the medical literature, which I did of the last 40 years, and looked for any trait at all linked with any brain system, I could find a host of traits in your biology, create a questionnaire using those traits, see who answers that questionnaire in which way, and then watch who's drawn naturally to whom. So I went through the biological literature looking for any trait at all linked with any brain system, and I found 4. If I had found 6, I would have done 6. If I had found 10, I would have found 10. I found 4. Dopamine system, serotonin system, testosterone system, and estrogen system. Each one of them is linked with a host of particular traits. So I created the questionnaire, put it on Match.com in 40 countries. Over 14 million people have taken this questionnaire, and I can watch on those sites who's naturally drawn to whom. So there's one thing about the questionnaire. I've really refined it a great deal recently, so that I call it your personality signature. Now this particular, I use royal blue for the high serotonin types, power tie red really for the high testosterone traits, what I call tree hugger green for the traits linked with estrogen, and yellow is traits linked with the dopamine because it's electric, it's energy, it's sun. And I call it your personality signature. I just made up that term. So now when you take my questionnaire, I not only show where you land in all 4 broad categories, but where you land absolutely individually. And eventually I hope to be able to say to people, look, have you and your partner both take this questionnaire, lay your 2 personality signatures on top of each other, and you're going to begin to know where some of the great joys are and the great sorrows are in your relationship. So, no 2 people are alike, as I mentioned. I think I'm an identical twin. Even the 2 of us are not exactly alike. I, in fact, gave 100,000 of these results to a friend of mine at Princeton, Lee Silver, and no 2 people took my questionnaire the same way. But there are patterns. There's patterns to nature, there's patterns to culture, and there's patterns to personality. And so I want to talk about the basic patterns and then why and who we're drawn to naturally. So just going through them. I had to name them. I'm working with Match.com. I call people who are very expressive of the traits linked with the dopamine scale the explorer. Those who are very expressive of the traits linked with the serotonin system, the builder. Those very expressive of the traits linked with the testosterone, the director, and the negotiator. Those expressed in a lot of traits in the estrogen system. But as I say, we're all a combination of all of them, but we have some more than others. So I'm going to go through them rapidly. People who are very expressive of the dopamine system tend to be novelty-seeking, risk-taking. It's called sensation-seeking in academia. They're curious. They've got the most interests. They're the most likely to get to college. They make the most money. They also lose the most money because they're such risk takers. Energetic, restless. They explore the physical as well as the mental. They're not just jumping off bridges. They're also going to the opera and the theater or reading poetry or whatever. They tend to be very optimistic. I actually think Obama is one of them. You know, The Onion, the humor magazine, when he won the first election, the lead line was, "Black man given worst job in the world." And indeed, I think he's still optimistic, to be honest with you. It's in his nature. They tend to be independent, self-reliant, impulsive. These are the ones that will walk into the bar and buy everybody a drink, spontaneous, often very generous. And what they really are is idea generation. If you give L-Dopa to a Parkinson's patient, their creativity will go up. Their gambling activity will also go up, and their sexuality will also go up. So they're even beginning to put warnings on those bottles for L-Dopa. It's basically associated with creativity, the dopamine system. I think a good example of this is Richard Branson. You know, as he said, "I've always thought rules were made to be broken," well summed up by a high dopamine type. Lang Lang, the concert pianist, flair, dazzling, charisma, bravado, extremes. And somebody like Gloria Steinem. Very different people, grew up in very different parts of the planet, have very different goals in life, made very different contributions, but the same basic temperament. And they are drawn to people like themselves. People who are curious, creative, spontaneous, and energetic want somebody like themselves. There's another type, the high serotonin type. I call them pillars of society. Plato called them guardians. Plato actually did see these four types. So did Aristotle. A lot of people throughout history have intuitively found four very broad styles of thinking and behaving. These people they observe social norms. We know the genetics of that. They like the familiar. They're cautious. They're not scared. They're what we call harm avoidant. They're calm, self-controlled, often very modest. They like plans, rules, schedules. They tend to be orderly, sustained attention. They can keep on doing something long after the dopamine guy is wandering off somewhere else. Concrete thinkers. They don't like high theory. They like it concrete. I learned the hard way. I was in Seattle, and I was talking to a woman about the book I wrote on this called Why Him, Why Her, and I could tell this woman hated me. And of course, I became more flamboyant because I'm more the high dopamine type. The more I got nervous, and the following morning I read what she said to me in the newspaper. And I realized that moment that you got to talk to people the way they can hear you. And what I should have done is drawn myself back, given almost no theory, and talked about the eigenanalysis and factor analysis, and just give it poor math all over her. And she probably would have respected me. So these people are very good with numbers. They tend to be religious. Religiosity is in the serotonin system. They follow the rules. Loyal is a very interesting one. Mathematically, I can't quite remember the question on the questionnaire, but it's something like, would you rather have interesting friends or loyal friends? Now, we all want interesting friends, and we all want loyal friends, but this type can't tolerate unloyal friends, and the other three types cannot tolerate uninteresting friends. It's a real mathematical and brain divide. Anyway, a good example is Mitt Romney. Oh my God, is he ever a detail guy and religious guy and a sense of duty guy? I had to write a piece for Newsweek comparing him with Obama. It was very easy because they're such really almost archetypes. Hu Jintao, the former president of China. I haven't studied the recent one, but I certainly will. But modest man and all kinds of details of how you're supposed to behave, codes of ethics. And George Washington, certainly our first president, a very modest man, could have been king, chose not to. He was the right man in the right place at the right time in American history. The third, these people go for people like themselves. Once again, traditional goes for traditional. In those two cases, the high dopamine goes for high dopamine types, curious, creative, spontaneous, energetic. These go for the similar person too, somebody who's equally traditional, conventional, follows the rules. Third type is the high testosterone type, Now, I would have to say that Mr. Trump is over the top on this one, but we got some normal people we could study instead. They're very good spatial skills. I would imagine a lot of people in this room have some of this in them. Rank-oriented, competitive. They do what's called dominance matching. They will attack, and they expect you to attack back. And if you don't, they often think that you're weak. And it happened to me one night. I learned my lesson. It was a black tie event in New York, and I was standing there with 4 men, and one of them was from a major newspaper, major national newspaper, and he was taking me to the cleaners, taking Helen Fisher to the cleaners. And I just got smaller and smaller. You know, there's 2 basic postural messages in the animal community: looking big and looking little. All kinds of, even goldfish do it. They'll pull out their pectoral fins and look big. Lobsters will walk on their walking legs, or they look very little. So I got littler and littler, and everybody was just looking. Nobody was doing anything, and he kept on taking me out. And finally, something happened in my head, and I turned around him, and I don't remember what I said, but it was vicious. It was so vicious. And it was fortunately also funny. And so the 5 of us went like this. It's called the barred tooth display. Chimpanzees do it too when you're terrified. And I thought to myself, oh, if he thinks like a woman, he'll never forgive me. If he thinks like a man, it might be dominance matching, and he will respect me. And there was this long pause, and all of a sudden he threw up his hand. He said, oh, Helen. And he started to laugh. That let the other guys laugh. And that guy's liked me ever since. So I often tell people, you know, attack back. But it's a little hard to do if it's your boss, you know. But anyway, it can work. Emotionally contained. I have a girlfriend who told me this story some time ago. She said, you know, she said to her husband, she said, sweetie, you haven't told me that you loved me in a month. And he said, well, that was last month and nothing's changed. So they're very emotionally contained, decisive, bold, and they get to the point. The other kinds that scream, get to the point. A good example would be Steve Jobs. Self-disciplined, brash, prickly, demanding, brutally honest, exacting, demanding, impatient. He's also got a very high testosterone face. The heavy brow ridges, the high forehead, the very strong jaw are all built by, and the zygomatic arch, the cheekbones are all built by testosterone. I think there's some women, of course, who are also high testosterone. Margaret Thatcher and I think also Hillary Clinton. When she was asked why Bill was attracted to her, she said, he wasn't afraid of me. Now, I wouldn't have thought of that myself if somebody asked me why. But anyway, and these people are drawn to their opposite. The high testosterone type goes for the high estrogen type. And here are the high estrogen types. Oxytocin is also part of the system. I coined the term web thinking. I know the brain circuitry for this. They tend to think contextually, long-term, holistically. And because of that, they're very mentally flexible. They're very imaginative, intuitive, can tolerate ambiguity. Good people skills and verbal skills are linked with the estrogen system. Intuitive, they can climb into your head and figure out what's going on. And they're empathetic and nurturing and trusting. The reason I really like this one is because anthropologists have never figured out how we could have ever evolved trustingness. I mean, if you trust the wrong person, you're really up the creek. But if you trust the right person, you save a lot of metabolic energy. And of course, these people are very well built to get into other people's head, to think very contextually, to read their body posture, their tone of voice, etc. So you can begin to see how a host of personality traits can evolve together to create almost a paradigm. They are introspective. Everything has meaning. Just the way he cuts the lemon at dinner tonight means you're not having sex tonight. You know everything has meaning for these people. And of course, they seek harmony, and they're very agreeable. They won't hit you in the face. They'll stab you in the back. I didn't have time. I was going to tell you about all the downsides of these people, but never mind, a different time. And they're emotionally expressive and have a diplomatic intelligence. A good example, I think, is Oprah Winfrey. Another is Bill Clinton. Whole world knows this guy talks. Real people skills. His book is, I don't know, 963 pages or something like that. He's got a real synthesizing mind, as he believes that it's important to have a synthesizing mind. Quite compassionate. He was the one that was worried about crying at the daughter's wedding, and he's emotionally expressive. In fact, we're all wondering when we're going to have our first female president. I think we've had our first female president, and it's Bill Clinton. And of course, Darwin. He collected more disparate animals, plants, and everything than any other human being on Earth. He's very high, I think, on the estrogen scale, making this enormous contribution to the sciences. So these people, the high estrogen type, are quite likely to, more than statistically significantly likely to go for their opposite. The high testosterone goes for the high estrogen, and the high estrogen goes for the high testosterone. This next slide is the most important one of my life. Very little importance to you, but I wanted to show it to you anyway. Because what I've been able to do is the questionnaire that I designed, and I know I'm bragging, is the first questionnaire in the world that starts from an understanding of brain chemistry to make the questionnaire, and then goes back. I did 2 fMRI brain scanning studies to show that that questionnaire actually is measuring what I say it's measuring. It is measuring brain systems. I think it's the first to actually validate what it's really measuring. And that's some of the data on it. I think these 4 broad styles of thinking and behaving evolved millions of years ago. For millions of years, we lived in little hunting and gathering groups. There were probably about 25 individuals in a group. There were probably 10 or 12 children and adolescents and about 10 or 12 grown-ups. And they're all going over a hill together and looking for a new place to stay. And they suddenly see some mushrooms. Well, you can't have all the explorers say, let's try the mushrooms. You got to have some of the builders, the high traditional types, saying it's not in our tradition to try these mushrooms. You got to have some of the director types, the high testosterone types, who make an experiment and say, well, let's feed the mushrooms to the dog and see what happens. And you got to have some high estrogen people who say, let's sit down and pool our data and talk about these mushrooms. So I think that they all evolved together, and I think that the understanding of these personality styles can be useful not only in understanding who your partner is, but understanding your business partner, in understanding how to provoke people to innovate, to understand what kind of leader people are going to be. I know right now a guy in Florida is using my questionnaire to put together juries in criminal trials. Somebody else is working on trying to match foster parents with foster children. In other words, I see now that I can have a much broader use for this understanding of basic personality. So because of that, I created a new company. It's called Neurocolor, in which I upgraded the personality questionnaire to be for business, so that I could begin to understand how you would match jobs, build teams, build a corporate board, et cetera. So if you want to know more about that, you could take the very short questionnaire. It takes about 8 minutes by going there. The longer one, you would get a 20-page profile. That's probably not going to be up very long. Or you can watch a 2.5-minute tape on it. But bottom line is, I want to end with 2 things: a story and an end. the story, and it's a true story, is I went to Japan with Match.com but to start their dating service in Japan. And I spent a week talking to the journalists about these 4 broad styles of thinking and behaving and love, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally the night came, last night came, and I said to my wonderful little handler, I said, well, what are we doing tonight? She said, well, we're going to have a little a party. And I get to this party, and the place looks like the White House. And there's columns, and there's 8-foot-high flower arrangements, and there's mannequins with wedding dresses. And what they've done is they've created a party for the first 400 people in Japan who joined this dating site. And I said, oh, that's cool. What's my job? And she said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to have a little icebreaker, Helen. You're going to explain the 4 broad personality styles, and then we're going to have a little icebreaker. What we're going to do is we're going to wheel out, and it was at least 4, it was maybe 600 people in there with everybody else, and it was a big ballroom, and they're going to wheel out 4 tables, and on each table is going to be the bottom of a layer cake, a 2-foot by 2-foot bottom of the layer cake. And everybody had taken my questionnaire, and they were wearing a rubber band of the different color of the 4 personality styles. And the 4 different broad styles of thinking and behaving, we're going to go to different parts of the room and decorate this bottom of the layer cake, of the wedding cake. And I thought, oh, this is the nadir of my scientific thing. What do I know about wedding cakes? So anyway, they did it. And I was to walk around the room. And I walked around the room, and the first wedding cake I saw was made by the negotiators, and it was this. That cake was smiling at me. It was saying, please like me. Let's be friends. I'm harmless. It's a sweet wedding cake. I don't know if I wanted it for a wedding cake, but it's a sweet, charming, high estrogen type of thing. So then I go over to the builders, the high serotonin type, the traditional people, and the crowd parts, and this is what I see. Now that's much more formal. It's very quite traditional. It's very lush. It's probably who you would want to have do your wedding cake. We got 1 kiwi, 1 cherry, 1 kiwi, 1 cherry, 1 kiwi, 1 cherry. It's an organized, concrete, not theoretical or exploratory, solid wedding cake. So then I go over to the high testosterone group, the crowd parts, and this is what I see. Now, there is no emotion in that cake, none. But they decorated around the cake. They thought outside the box. They were inventive, as the high testosterone style of thinking often is. So then I go last to the high dopamine cake, the explorer cake, and the crowd parts. And the first thing that I see is 3 men pitching fruit at the cake. And then I walk over to it, and they see me coming, and a guy standing next to the things takes some flowers out of a vase that has nothing to do with the decorations and plunges it into the middle of the cake. And there's what I say. Bottom line is, I no longer believe in the golden rule. Treat your partner or your business partner as you want to be treated. I believe in the platinum rule. Treat them as they want to be treated. Understand who they are and treat them the way they want to be treated, and you will win. So I want to end with a note. The words of Pablo Neruda, who wrote, "If nothing saves us from death, at least love should save us from life." I think it does. Brings us some of the greatest joy of all humanity. And romantic love and attachment are here to stay. In fact, any understanding of human nature, of human relationships, and of human future must take into account one of the most powerful determinants of human behavior, the unquenchable, adaptable, and primordial human drive to love. Thank you. So I think we have 1 minute. We started a little bit late, so does anybody have a 1-minute question?
Don't know if it's a 1-minute question, but I was curious if you, in your neurocolor characterization, do you find much familiar similarity? Members of the same family, do they have similar traits? And how much change do you see as someone goes through the differentiation process, say from age 15 to 20 to age 30 to 40?
Okay, so the first thing is that I don't know the answer of how much difference there is in family, because I don't have any information on the rest of the family members. But because I've been talking a lot about this, various people just in my personal life can be very different. For example, I know a man quite well who's very high dopamine, and his son is very high serotonin. The son would have voted for Cruz. I mean, the son is, and the father is all over the place. So, and I know another friend, and it's 3 brothers, and it appears to me, only one has taken the questionnaire, I don't know the other 2, but when I know about them, it appears that the other 2, one is very expressive of the dopamine system. He's been to 178 countries and does, very curious. And another appears to be very high, the estrogen, and the third, very high serotonin. So, when egg meets sperm, there's something like 8 million combinations, and I don't know whether it runs in families, but it's certainly, there's the cultural component too. And it's interesting, my little handler at MASH, she said, I grew up in a family of high serotonin type, traditional, conventional, follow the rules, and she was much of the explorer type, and she always felt as if her family didn't understand her. And I think that that's probably among some of the reasons. But you asked another question of how you change over the life course. I still haven't done my retest to find out, and I need to do that in my math. But in other tests, they find that of temperament, they find that about 85% of the time you remain the same. For example, if you're a very curious person, high dopamine type, at age 4 you're going to be interested in blocks and trucks or dolls and whatever. But at 14, or 24, you're going to be interested in boys and booze and travel and this and that. By age 45, you're going to be interested in the opera and the theater. But you're going to that curiosity is going to remain. So, can you make a curious person uncurious? Sure, you can beat them, but I'm really studying basic temperament. Now, I've seen women who are very much the explorer type, and then they have a baby. And suddenly they want schedules and plans and this and that. But my guess is that the vast majority of them, once that baby's out of the nest, they'll be back to who they really are. So and you find, it's very interesting now, for example, I'm also finding different cultures have different personality styles. For example, the gene for social norm conformity is most prevalent in China and Japan. And a gene in the dopamine system of the DRD4 repeat allele it's linked with risk-taking and novelty-seeking, and it's strongest up the Amazon River. Now, these people all walked over the Bering Strait, so there was a whole lot of explorers in their past, but maybe to survive in the Amazon, culturally, you need to, there's selection for that kind of individual who can do that. So I'm beginning to see, I'm certainly watching Hillary and Trump. I mean, everybody is, and looking at world leaders, business leaders. I think different companies are going to have different personality styles because they're going to select for certain, they're going to hire certain kinds of people, et cetera. So. Anybody? Oh, you got a question?
Hi, thanks for being here. So we just saw that the yellow tend to partner with yellows, blue with blues, and then red and green together. However, we see that sometimes there's a blue one that is in love with a yellow one, and maybe they are fighting a lot, but they still love each other and they want to stay together. So how do you explain that? And
yeah, well, first of all, all the data that I've got now is on Match.com, who you naturally select to go out with. And for example, let's say there's a man who's very high yellow, very high dopamine, the explorer type. And he's been around the block a million times, gone out with a million girls. He's now in his late 40s, let's say. And he wants to settle down. it's entirely possible that he's going to go pick a high blue, a high serotonin type because he wants a different lifestyle. Now, what kind of life are they going to have? Perfectly wonderful if they continue to respect each other and continue to need the traits of the other person. And in my book, Why Him, Why Her, I go into different kinds of matches. You know, there's really no bad match, but they're going to have different joys and different sorrows. And I think even different kinds of addictions. Now, for example, my guess is that two blues, the high serotonin type, traditional type, they're going to bicker because they got a certain way you mop the floor. You got to mop it that way. You know, and two high yellows, they're going to say, how do you want me to mop the floor? Well, I don't care. You mop the floor, mop it any way you want to mop. You know, so they're not going to have that kind of issue. They're going to have a different issue, maybe with addiction, maybe with philandering. So I think that there's any combination is going to have great joys and great sorrows. Nobody gets out of love alive. Nobody.
Thank you.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Very interesting talk. I wanted to ask about whether there's any sort of feedback systems between your conscious mind and your endocrine system, and so much that you can control those sort of feelings. First of all, and it's actually a two-part question. The second one,
I can't remember two parts.
Okay,
Let's
just go with that
first
one.
Yeah, no, I'm not good at that. There's always feedback. We evolved an enormous, you know, cerebral cortex with which we make all kinds of decisions. And you may be the kind, I mean, people who are, I'm really glad you brought this up. I mean, some people are predisposed to alcoholism and they give up drinking. Some people are lazy and they get to their job every day. Some people would love to philander with this or that and they choose not to. They've got small children, they love their wife or husband, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, scientists now think that a good 40 to 60% of who you are is biologically derived. And a good 40 to 60% is culturally derived. And you know, people have begun to win Nobel Prizes for epigenetics, for the fact that these are always in cahoots. Culture is going to change certain biological patterns, and biology is going to change certain cultural patterns. So the parts of the brain are all very well connected. What's so remarkable is they're not that well connected. We still have a lot of people who are adulterous, who don't feel that that's the right thing to do and are anyway. So we all need to, but we do have a natural temperament. And then...
That actually brings me on to my second question.
Good.
So I just finished a brilliant book by Alain de Botton called The Course of Love. And in it, he describes at length the sort of paradoxes of romantic love. And as you showed a slide with these three systems, it sort of struck me that they're all battling each other. They're all sort of enemies of each other. And I was wondering if you could talk about, you said that 84% of societies...
86% of societies permit a man to have several wives.
Okay. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could talk about alternative systems that have existed, that have tried to address this paradox.
Okay.
And a little bit about why they failed, how they failed, and whether you believe that this sort of single-person pairing in the very traditional monogamous sense is the most successful means of living a happy life.
I can't, I never did say that it was, that I believed that it was the most successful. I said from an evolutionary perspective, that's what humankind does. I'm an anthropologist. I'm not in the advice business. I'm in the business of looking at data and seeing what you see. But first of all, just to start back a little bit, I don't think that the sex drive, feelings of intense romantic love, and feelings of attachment are necessarily battling each other. When you're madly in love with somebody, you're really focused on only them. You're dying to get in bed with them and make love to them, and you can feel deeply attached to them. In many times, I think, in many parts of our lives, we've probably all had the experience of being madly in love, deeply attached, and very sexually devoted to a single human being. So I don't see them as always battling. I think they become into a battle when you get restless and you look around. But I don't see them as necessarily antagonistic. There's all kinds of other patterns that people try. One of them right now is polyamory. And I don't want to get into that, but in many respects, these polyamorous persons, poly means many, amory means love, many love. So it's not swinging. They want to stay in one deep attachment with one person and have romances on the side. And they want to be above board about it. They want to be honest about it. And so they will, and they actually really like my work. They used to send me their magazine. It's called Loving More. I don't know if it's still in business. But what they like about it is the fact that, you know, I have proposed that there are these three broad styles of, three brain systems, and that they're being honest about the fact that they want to express them all. They want to express them with different people, and they want to have a deep attachment and sustain that long-term partnership. What's interesting about that is that they have to fight jealousy. And if, you know, Thursday through Sunday, they have all kinds of rules. No dates on Friday night is family night. You can't entertain in the house. But they spend an awful lot of time talking about their feelings. I know I couldn't do it. I couldn't spend my time. Some people can do that. A lot of people can't. They get jealous. This is why we call it clandestine adultery. That's why people go for the clandestine rather than the open, because the human animal is a jealous animal. Arranged marriages can work very well. You know, when it's an arranged marriage, you've already solved a lot of problems. You are from the same socioeconomic background. You hopefully are part of the same level of intelligence, and these days even the same level of education and good looks, et cetera. So if the matching is right, you've solved some of the issues. And what's interesting, in India, they have a very, very fancy, very elaborate, often 5-day wedding ceremony. And during that wedding ceremony, it's very exciting. Everybody's dressed up. There's all kinds of food and music, and the girl is always very pretty because they've, you know, everything's so dolled up. And they even have a word for the moment that romantic love comes into the relationship. And because the wedding is so exciting, with excitement, you're driving up the dopamine system and could push you over the threshold into falling in love. So there is a pattern of pair bonding in which they have created a large mechanism to trigger romantic love, and as well as attachment. And in long-term, arranged marriages can work extremely well. There's no place in the world today, apparently, where people are married without ever having met each other at least a few times. And the children can say yes or no. Actually, I was traveling in Iran and even in Saudi Arabia and asked people about that. So even today, you can make some choices. But arranged marriages can often work. We don't understand that in the West, but they can work. And when you take a look at these people after 10 years of marriage, you find, if they sustain their marriage, that people in an arranged marriage are just as happy as people in a marriage of choice. So there's a lot of different alternatives. As I said, 86% of world cultures permit a man to have several wives, but very few men actually get enough resources to acquire many wives. We are basically a pair bonding animal, a serial pair bonding animal.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.